You're listening to The Dental Guys, episode 70. Printers gonna print.
Is 3D printing for real? And is it really ready for today? Is it just something for the dental lab, or can you implement this in your office tomorrow? We bring Brad, the dental lab guy, onto the show to discuss his experience with 3D printing and to discuss what it really is useful for now.
We're gonna take your printing to the next level this week on The Dental Guys.
This episode of The Dental Guys is brought to you by the Dental Crafters Network, your implant restorative connection. From surgical planning to patient-specific guides, quality implants, and final restorations, the Dental Crafters Network provides one relationship with infinite possibilities. Call 1-800-472-8302 today. That's 1-800-472-8302.
And by Restorative Driven Implants. Understand, place, restore, and implement dental implant treatment from John and Wes, the Dental Guys. Go to restorativedrivenimplants.com right now to sign up for the next series of courses and take your implant education to the next level. And welcome to this week's episode of The Dental Guys. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm John, the dental guy.
Hey, Brad, welcome back to the show. Brad, the Dental Lab Guy's with us. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, as we continue in our marathon recording session, now into
John,
hour
time
two.
ever.
First time ever. We've never done two back-to-back like this. It's
never
awesome.
done two back-to-back. The only person that I've ever been on longer with is probably Tehran Agrawal. We've been on with
we
him.
could talk. He could talk for 8 hours straight and not even get tired.
Exactly, and not even eat or drink.
No,
you know, just
well, no,
give
he
him a
does
pack of
eat. He
peanuts.
demanded snacks. He did demand
That's
snacks
right.
halfway
That's
through.
Right, he did.
Chocolate, lots of. But this when we have
time,
and we said like when we got well we said when we got Brad we gotta. I mean if we got him. We got to keep him on here because, he's a busy man. And so if you get him, you got to keep him. And we just finished up recording. If you haven't listened to it, we would definitely think you're going to get a lot out of this last episode we recorded on scanning. But
turn the MP3 player off and go back and listen to the Scanners Suck episode.
Yeah, and figure out what we think about scanning. But Wes kind of alluded to this at the end of the last episode. He said, a lot of the stuff with scanning, it's kind of plateaued in a way. There's a lot of things that the technology is not changing a whole lot. But this episode on 3D printing, we wanted to do it right because this technology is changing. It is going so fast. And we've gone from, this being a technology that was truly like space age and it was only available to NASA to where now, my son has got a printer in his room that he's printing
he's
a part.
Rapid prototyping.
He's printing out parts for Wes's racing drone, So, but this is something that Brad has some very interesting experience with. And Brad, I think to start the show, get right into it, I want to hear Brad's own story about 3D printing. So, Brad, tell us a story.
I'd like to think we're pretty well early adopters on technology. Not to say we're the first in, but we like to really analyze, research, test before we actually bring the product or process into the lab. So years ago when 3D started hitting, we were on it. I'm thinking, this is it. This is cool. Everybody says that you're going to be able to 3D print a human body, and it's going to live. I swear. That's what they were saying years ago. So we started research, and how we did it is we took a file, an STL file, and a dental model. We sent it to every manufacturer of 3D printers at that time. So 3D Systems, Envision Tech, Stratasys, those were probably the three earliest printing manufacturers that were on the market. So we sent those models out, and we get them back in, and we're like, well, okay, they look awesome. I mean, they look really cool. They're 3D, they're really neat looking, but how do you know they're accurate? How do you know that anything's going to fit on them? So then we use some software where we use a scanner, and we scanned the model in after it's printed, and you superimpose the STL file into what the end result is. and it gives you how accurate or inaccurate it is. It was mind-boggling, guys. Absolute mind-boggling how inaccurate the printers were. They were terrible.
Well, I thought you were gonna say how accurate.
No,
Yeah, how
this
good
is
they were.
years ago. They were terrible. And we kept dragging our feet. And when you said, you talk about the story, how we got into this goes years ago, okay? We kept dragging our feet. And every printer that hit the market, we did the same exact thing too. And what we started noticing, though, is the printers started getting better and better. Even the first 3 that we tested that were terrible, they're getting better and better. And then new companies are coming on, and they're getting better. So it finally got to the point where we did invest to the technology, and we jumped in to be able to print, models and surgical guides and different things. And we have 2 different printing technologies, 3 different printing technologies in the lab right now, and we have a 4th that's going to be added on here in June. But that was kind of our story as printing technology evolved. We wanted to make sure we were testing along the way, but it got pretty good. And in certain instances, and there are certain instances that it's still not real good. It just depends on what application you want to use it for.
Now, every time you implemented, when you finally decided,
I knew this was coming.
yeah,
I've been on the end of that phone call before.
Yeah, so when you finally decided, all right, I found one that's good enough. You proved to yourself it's time to invest. So you got this thing, and I'm pretty sure I know how it went. You got it, and it immediately worked, and it was the best thing you'd ever done, and you really felt like you'd made a great decision.
There was no calibration. It calibrated the first time.
Pretty much worked right out of the box, right?
Yeah, and what dream world are you guys living in? Because it's not the same as mine. But yeah.
So how easy was? I mean, did it work the way that you thought it was going to at first?
It depended on which printing technology. The first printing technology we invested in was actually to do surgical guides. And that was a much easier technology because it has, there's a little more open for tolerance there. Surgical guides, they're accurate, don't get me wrong, but they're accurate to snap in the patient's mouth, but they're not as accurate as we need for like a crown and bridge type model. Okay, so those I would have to say were fairly plug and play, a little bit of calibration and tweaking, but not bad. The model side was a different story. So we invested in technology that was fairly new. Nobody in the United States had it, and we invested into it, and it took us 9 months. 9 months of a piece of equipment.
So you guys had been doing this for a while. You had been printing. You knew how it worked, and it took 9 months to get to where you could print models like that you were happy with?
Yeah, I know there's probably a lab out there listening going, oh, they're crazy. I plugged mine in and I printed models right away. Well, we could have too. I could print models on day one, but it wasn't a model I was after. It was the tolerance, the accuracy that I was after. And that took us a while to tweak and change. And, we had to, learn the scaling factor of the unit. And then we had to, design some different artifacts. We actually calibrate ours daily. So we actually print an artifact on the printer plate the same time we print the models. And then we measure that to make sure it's got accuracy. And, they can get off at, just from sitting on, we have VCT tile in the lab. And just from it sitting on VCT tile, it started to settle. So that first couple months, it would settle and it would go off, and then we'd have to tweak it, and it would change. But once we got it dialed in, it's pretty accurate. But that was also a brand new technology, a brand new piece of equipment. So we had to go through some growing pains.
Man. What do you think that the market penetration in U.S. laboratories is right now with printing technology?
I'm just going to pull this out of my head, out of a hat, because I don't really know the number, Wes. I haven't been reading the studies and seeing that, but I would say you probably got to be 80% of the laboratories probably have some sort of printer in-house right now, would be my guess. Some sort of printer.
Okay.
So that's pretty high.
It's pretty high for laboratories. I'm talking laboratories, not dentists. I'm talking laboratories. Because there's so many applications to print. There's so many materials that you can print right now that, whether you're doing burnout type materials for crown and bridge, or RPDs, or split materials, or denture base is a new thing coming, or model resins. There's even just R&D stuff. We have just a printer just for R&D. So most labs have invested in some sort of printer from, they can get them down to $3,000,
But interestingly enough, only 10% of dentists are using optical scanners. So let's be clear here is that there are a lot more applications for printing files than there are using optical scanners right now in the mouth. Correct?
Correct.
So I think that what that tells us is that this is a world that's being driven by the laboratory.
I would say
it's
a world, much more of a world driven by the laboratory for sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So
what about what?
Oh, go ahead, Wes.
Well, I was just going to say, if the market penetration is so high in the lab industry with printers, what do you think it is in the dental office? Because the super cool kids that we always talk about, the Facebook drive-bys, and the peer-reviewed journals on the internet, again, they are all about these tabletop printers. And so what do you think the market penetration is in a dental office?
If we're at 10% saturation for optical scanners, I'd be willing to bet you we're less than 5%. 2% would be my guess of
I think
printers.
That's about right.
I have no validation of that, guys, but it's just a hunch.
Yeah, but I think you're right, because if only 10% of people are scanning,
right,
then those are the people that are going to have printers, and most people don't have printers.
Right.
So I would say between 2 and 5%.
I know a lot of people that scan, and so does Wes. Wes, and Brad, a lot of people that scan.
Yeah.
So what would you, of all the people of your doctors that scan, that send impressions through optical scanning, do any of them have printers?
Very, very few.
Okay.
Very few.
So that's just, we don't know what but the perception, like Wes said, on Facebook or whatever, is that, oh, everybody's got this and this is a cool thing. And I would encourage you for a great maybe learning thing on this. And I got to give credit to T-Bone, because T-Bone had Sully Sullivan from the Millennial Dentist podcast over at his house, and put a great video on there about how, Sully, and he himself admits that he kind of fell into this. He's like, man, I got to get this stuff, and realized later that, it's not really maybe as easy as what he thought, but that's a whole other discussion. I really think that the questions that people most commonly ask, the thing that gets debated a lot, is accuracy and precision. So, Brad, I want you to just speak to and you've come a long way in this technology, both with the technology changes that you've seen. What do you think the accuracy and precision at this point of 3D printed models compared to stone?
We scan in, and we've done some studies on this. We're about 98% accurate with our 3D printer compared to stone. So, and that's a moving target too, because stone itself has an expansion rate. You have high expansion or low expansion stones. So when you pour it, it changes in dimensional space. It depends on the unit you're using to print also, because you have how you scale that. So that's a moving target depending from lab to lab. So if we just take our stone and we use a 0.08 expansion rate on our stone, and we compare that to a printed type model, we're 98% accurate to that.
Okay. And we're still assuming that stone is the gold standard, which research says that it is still,
right,
when done properly, the gold standard as being the most repeatable way and most accurate way to come back to the mouth. In most situations, you're about 98% of the time hitting that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's interesting to hear, because that's something that as really, let's go back maybe when you first got into the technology, Brad. I know you don't have maybe exact numbers, but where do you think it was just a few years ago on accuracy?
Before we got involved into it, what's the
early? Like when you said the early ones, when they were struggling. I mean,
our data showed about 75 to 80% accurate.
Okay. So if you think about accuracy, one of the things that I look at is resolution, right? That's one of the numbers that a lot of the companies throw out there. Do you think that's how we should be looking at these when we talk about accuracy, or is it really just more having to compare in your, like you guys do with actually having a standard and overlaying? Can you look at a printer's resolution, for instance, and say, well, this is good enough for me, this is the one to buy? Is that how you buy a printer, or does it have nothing to do with that?
It all has something to do with it, but the end result getting out of the printer is what you have to look at. So definitely, resolution, and there's different technologies that are out there too. You have laser technology, you have DLP type technology. Those are the most infiltrated into the dental business, are those two types. Okay, so first you got to look at that. Then each one of those has their own resolution or pixel size of the camera, if you would. They have something to do with it also. Then there's just stability of the piece of equipment. How stable is it? Is it a small little tinker toy can move around as the printer head moves? What does it print on? Our printer has a 2-inch thick piece of granite that's fixed in that we print on. Some of them have a removable tray. So there's so many variables that you have to look at. But bottom line is the end result of the product that you get out of it. How accurate does it have to be? And
Right.
then you have to be able to look at that and compare it to something. And just to do some word clearing too, I guess the three things that we look at. You said two of the three, John. You said accuracy, precision, and tolerance is a third. So what is accuracy? Accuracy is how close a measurement is to true value. Okay, so that's kind of accuracy. Precision measures the repeatability of a measurement. How often can you do it and repeat that time and time and time again? And then you got tolerance. Tolerance is, what is this tolerance defined to you? How much wiggle room do you have? How well does it fit? So we kind of look at those three things, but it all comes down to the end result of the three-dimensional printed product that comes out of the machine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just give that maybe brass tacks on this. If you're having a crown made for your wife right now, do you trust a 3D printed model like you trust a stone model for a posterior single unit crown?
I trust ours. For sure.
That's what I mean.
I trust ours. But the context we're talking here, gentlemen, is I invested heavy into this technology. Okay, so you can buy small tabletop printers and stack them up, have 5-10 of them. $3,000 to $6,000 printer. I did not do that. I got about $300,000 invested in the technology that we have. But that is based on the accuracy of the model that I wanted out of it. You know what I mean? So it depends on what you wanted the end result.
We're not messing around here. You know? I mean, seriously, dude.
So you had to spend that much
this is
to get
industrial
what you needed.
stuff.
At that point in time, this is about 3 years ago. Okay. Now, interesting enough, that same piece of equipment is $100,000.
Gotcha.
For 3 years.
Point, you mean.
I just bought early.
Wow.
I wanted to get in. I wanted to do something different, and there's other applications we were using it for too. I needed something that was very, very precise. So just what I decided to do, right or wrong. But that same technology, it's a third the price right now than what it was 3 years ago. So, but
well, I think that puts it to sleep, though. I mean, you're saying, hey, I trust the model.
Absolutely.
That, obviously, you're not saying I trust every 3D printer in every office or every lab. I get that. But you're saying properly tested, properly vetted, properly set up, that the technology is at the point where you can say, yeah, this could replace stone in your lab for instance, the single unit crown type of situation.
If it's the right technology and it's calibrated and handled properly with the right engineers, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Let's just go down this route. I think that's a great segue, John. Brad, what are the most predictable procedures for lab printers right now? What are you using them for?
Well, most predictable for most common machines.
What would you say is, like we said last time, this is what we use it for. We know it's good for it.
Surgical guides are one. They fit pretty good. Aligners would be another one that fits pretty good. Wax or I shouldn't say it's a burnout resin that replaces wax. That has
Emax or
some Emax or even PFMs are kind of a thing of the past, but we still do some PFMs or full cast type crowns. Basically, because you can still come back and kind of do some addition to the margin if need be, and make sure it's sealed properly. So sometimes it just all depends on, again, the quality of that printer. So I think that's some predictability. When you start getting into models where you got to have a crown, or well, at least I want to have the crown fit the model. And let me take a step back and talk about that a little bit. I was at a CalLab meeting here, I think it was this last February. Maybe it might have been the year before that. A lab stood up and said, look, is anybody having problems with the 3D printing? Because, I trust STL files where I can accept it from a doctor and I can run it through CAD software and design a crown, and I can mill a crown on my milling machines. I've done that for years and I know they fit. But I take that same crown and I go to the model and I don't even use the model. I trust the crown fits because it was milled in an STL file, but I don't trust that it's going to fit this model. It doesn't fit, but it fits the patient's mouth. So what they're saying is I don't trust 3D technology, 3D printing, okay? So we in the lab, I want it to be just like an impression. I want my models coming out of my printer to fit just like I pour gypsum into an impression, and I can verify margins, I can verify contacts and occlusions if needed. That's my expectation out of my piece of equipment, just my standard that I set, right or wrong. So models are harder to make that work depending on the technology. If you require that type of fit. If you don't, and you're saying, look, I'm just going to mill the crown and trust it's going to fit out of the CAD, I don't care if it fits the model, I'm only sending it for show, then almost any printer will work because you're going to just print a model. But if you want that crown to fit that model precisely, like a gypsum pour out of an impression, then it's a little harder to make that happen in a laboratory.
Wow, so that's actually a pretty big deal there, because what you're saying is it's predictable, but it's actually kind of hard to make it predictable. I mean, it sounds like you can't just make the blanket statement that 3D printed models are predictable for crown margins. It's something that you really have to work at, and you have to have the right technology and all of that in order. I mean, so you can't make a blanket statement because you got labs out there who are saying, I don't have a model that works.
Right. Yep, exactly. And their expectations.
So is that why labs are gone modelless, because it's just too hard to print a model to make it work?
I think they're driving that because of that. That there's a lot of technology, it doesn't work accurately, and
you
so,
really
yeah,
don't
why make
need
it
a
fit?
model.
You don't. If you have your CAD settings down, you can actually go modelless. Now, in our lab, I decided not to, but I have an accurate printer. So in my modelless is I print a little bitty small solid with a single die, so I can still inspect my margins under a microscope, and I can still inspect my contacts with a solid cast. That's my modelless. It's not an articulated model. It's not a full-fledged model. There's a lot of labs that don't have the ability to do what we do, so they just do a crown and no model, which if they dial their settings in, it can work. It can work. It's just whatever their workflow wants to be and what the expectations of the doctor would be.
So implant surgical guides are predictable. Models for crown and bridge are predictable with a lot of ifs, with a lot of caveats, a lot of things. Aligners are pretty predictable. What else is really predictable? Besides, you mentioned burnout resin. What else?
Partial frameworks is, again, a burnout resin. You can print them pretty easily. The problem is really casting them. It's not really the printer that's the issue, but you still have to encompass them in gypsum, and you have to cast that. And there's some inaccuracies in just the casting and burning out the resin that are some challenges, again, depending on how well you want your partial to fit. But you can print them. Yeah, fairly decent, because there's a lot of, they're flexible clasps and, some, say, fudge factor there in a partial, that can have, but that's, really where we're at in our laboratory. Now, there's the limitation to some of the most limitation to 3D printing right now, gentlemen, is product development in materials. That's really where our limiting factor right now is. I think the technology is getting a lot better, but like denture-based resin, there's one FDA-approved denture-based resin that's printable that I know of. I know there's a bunch supposedly in development. Either they're caught up in FDA or they're not developed yet or working on it. Same thing with like occlusal mouth guards, those type of things. That's kind of on the, but there's very few, or if any, products that you can print that are FDA approved there. Some limitations.
I think we should just talk about that. I know we kind of had that in the outline later, but I just want to maybe stop there for a second and dwell on that, because that's something that I don't hear really talked about a whole lot. But I remember when I was just at the ADA meeting last year, and I was just walking around talking to printing people just to see what they had to say. And I went to one company and I said, so show me, kind of what you have for materials. And they said, well, we've got, this, and this, and this. And then they made a point. They said, we have to tell you that these are not FDA approved for use in the mouth. And I was like, well, what do you got that is? And they said, we got this one color of provisional material. It's like a B1, and I kind of started looking into that. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware of that you're really, like people that are, for instance, making night guards on a printer, there are not a lot of materials out there that the FDA says are even safe to be used, right?
You got it. Yeah. So be careful. What they say can be done, and what is being done out there are two different things.
Basically, you're telling me you said be careful, and that's something that I think maybe we're not hearing very much of, and I think that it's a little bit scary to think about that because, I think about just a few years ago, the whole BPA scare, bisphenol A, and it was in all the stuff and it got taken out. And I worry a little bit about non-approved products being put in patients' mouths, especially with some of the stuff that has happened with crowns that have had, problems with certain metals in them and things like that. So I get the feeling that the materials are maybe I don't know, Brad, do you think that they're close to being approved, or do you think that it's really just kind of a lot of smoke and mirrors right now?
No, I think you got a lot of development going on right now. Everybody knows it's a limitation, and either they're in development or they're stuck in FDA. I do think you're going to see an insurgent of a bunch of materials hitting here in the next, 12 to 24 months.
Okay. So that's going to change.
So is there a difference between what you're providing the doctors versus what, let's say that your laboratory, which is ISO certified, and you're providing a product that's going to be used in the mouth, okay? Let's just say a night guard. Are there limitations put on that for you, as a lab from the FDA?
Not just because I'm ISO doesn't mean there's limitations to doing that. Doesn't mean that it's like I get federally regulated and they come in and audit me. It means nothing. It's just my own ISO is a standard of manufacturing that we selected to hold ourselves to. So we go through the standard. So no, we're like everybody. You're supposed to just use FDA approved products if it goes in a patient's mouth and stays in.
Use.
Absolutely. And I would like to think that most do. I mean, because there's why wouldn't you? There could be some cowboys out there doing some things, but I'd like to think that most labs follow the rules and use what they're supposed to use. It's just a limitation. There's not a lot out there to do. So the manufacturers keep kind of pushing, going, we can, like you see. I was just out on a website looking at a new printer tonight, and I bet you there was 10 different products, resins, that they had on there, and it said, coming soon, coming soon, coming soon.
Gotcha.
So they're still teasing it, but they're held up in the FDA too,
So one of the major limitations, and this sounds like this is from the lab or the office use, is the materials, but that's about to change. So that's a good update, that we're making progress. That's why we talk about this is happening so fast. And even with the materials, there was an interesting article that we were kind of talking about just a couple weeks ago when we saw each other, talking about differences between resins, for printers, and that JPD was doing a study comparing different resins and accuracy. And that's the other thing with this whole product deal. As I start to think about, products come out and they make claims, but it's going to take time to vet these claims, just like it took you time to calibrate your printer, to print an accurate model. And now a new resin comes out or a new product comes out. You've also got to make sure that that actually works as planned as far as, I think about, porosity, shade, stability, with printing denture resins or printing. I don't know if these are real concerns or these are just things that, does anybody really know about how these products are going to perform?
I don't think I think we've all known for years dental industry does their own R&D. True or not true? How many things you got dump on the market that go through approval? It's through FDA, but it doesn't mean it's going to be a long-standing restoration for the patient. We do R&D. And it's kind of sad in our world. So I think you're going to find these new products that have come out, and we're going to find out in the next 5 to 10 years if they withstand plaque and bacteria and staining and how well they wear. You know, in my lifetime, I could tell you 5 products are off the top of my head that, you know, hit the market and failed. You know, so
because of the lack of testing.
lack of testing, absolutely. You know, and everybody wants to push everything to its limits right away. You know,
so really, what you're using for it now is the most predictable things.
Yeah.
You said it: implant guides, aligners, wax patterns that are burnout resins, and then really you're taking it to the next level and saying, "Hey, I want my models to be the best that they can be, to be on par with gypsum models, so that you can kind of go one step further with a step check and verify that, one, you're doing as a verification, it seems like to me, that your milling machine is milling accurately."
correct. Yeah,
Because
that's a pretty crazy level, because, you know, just a couple of years ago, what we were hearing was, you know, we can't validate printers easily because the printers are inaccurate. Now you're saying the printers are actually accurate enough that you're using them to help validate your milling. That's pretty cool.
I don't know if I'd totally say that we validate our milling, because I trust my milling much more. That strategy's been around for a long time. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't say I'm proving my printers are good. I'm more or less saying that my crowns, my models match the accuracy of my printing, is what I would say.
So basically, I like what you said there, though. Milling's been around a lot longer. And so whenever we're dealing with technology, you know, we have to be careful that we are kind of like right there, but we're not like so far in it that we're pushing it. Like, seems like to me that dentists and some maybe lab guys want to be so bleeding edge that they're pushing it. And those people, to me, need to be in a university setting where you can actually do proper vetting of materials across multiple patients.
And if things don't work, you can start over very easily.
Right. I think it's a better place for it. So some dentists, Brad, and we talked about probably only 2 to 5% of people in the United States, maybe based on our best estimate, are using these tabletop printers, or these smaller printers, more affordable printers, in their office. And I know that you know a little bit about some of these things, but because it's not, you know, what you're doing, because you're doing it on a grand scale. But can you speak to what you've seen? Because I know you've bought some of these machines to just see what's going on.
You know, they're a cool toy. Don't get me wrong. They're a cool little toy to have. I was just in an office in your guys' back door, and a doctor had one. He was printing surgical guides. You know, it's cool to say I can do it, but I have yet to see the accuracies. I haven't seen the application. I struggle with the doctor, you know, that's supposed to be a billable of $500, $800 an hour, how they make any money doing that, but that's another subject. You know, so I don't know if that's going to take off. You are going to see a heavy push towards that. We saw it in IDS in March at the International Dental Show in Cologne, Germany. Small little bitty milling machines and small little printers that are office related. And 3 or 4 companies I talked to when I interviewed them about, you know, where they headed, it was the same story. We've maximized the dental laboratory market with our machines. We've infiltrated heavy. So basically what they're telling you is we can't sell any more machines because the market's saturated with milling machines and printing machines, right? So what market do they go after? They're going to the dentist direct to say, well, you need to buy a little printing machine. You need to buy a little dental milling machine. I think a lot of the pressures we're getting are from these companies pushing these products on us. It doesn't make it right for your practice or for the patient. They're just trying to push materials. So they're going after the guys who think it's cool, it's neat to be able to do that, and I think they oversell it. And I just be careful, because I don't think there's a real good ROI on having a little printing machine sitting in your office. You know, how you make money doing that is fairly limited on the materials you can print with it, and they're very limiting on the accuracy of the materials you do print with those machines.
And I think with that in mind, let's just kind of go through the list of what's most predictable. Let's say you have a tabletop printer in your office, or you're looking at buying a tabletop printer. what are some of the things that we can say maybe you could use it for? And we're going to talk about whether you should, but what could you use it for? Well, I think we can say, surgical guides. I've seen some cool workflows that I think probably could be pulled off well. Again, we're assuming a lot of things we're going to talk about later as far as your time and training. But let's assume you have good time and training. I think that some of these machines, if assuming that you have the time and training, do you think, Brad, that some of these tabletop printers could be good enough in terms of their accuracy and precision to be able to make, for instance, a good, say, surgical guide if somebody's properly trained in how to use this software?
Yeah, I think, accuracy within, a millimeter to a millimeter and a half accuracy. What I mean by that is accuracy when you place that implant and compare it to the plan. I think those printers could get you semi-close to that. I don't think I'd plan an implant that's real close tolerance using them.
Mm-hmm.
You'd want to have some fudge factor within your placement. But yeah, I think you can get away with doing surgical guides.
Yeah, and I think something like night guards and aligners, I do see, again, assuming you want to take the time to do that, I think night guards and aligners are a good application potentially for a tabletop printer as we know it now, because even there your tolerances can be a little bit less and still have a pretty good result. And there's whole businesses that are built on, to kind of trying to save money compared to, say, Invisalign by printing your own aligners in your office. And I feel like that's probably pretty predictable. Now, from the ones that you've seen or used, and there's a lot of them, we don't want to get into branding so much, just to kind of say, from what you've used, Brad, with these printers, do you think that's pretty much where it stops? Is again your night guards, aligners, maybe a surgical guide if you're really doing your planning properly and being careful to realize that you're not going to be as accurate. Do you think that's about what's possible at this point?
Yeah, I think that sums up the majority. If you want to get into software and have CAD software, in-house and design some crowns, you could probably start printing some temporaries, a temporary material if you want to make a CAD temporary. Again, I'm not sure how you ROI that versus throwing some BizCrill in an impression and making a temporary. But if you're geeking out on that stuff, I think that's a viable option. It's just a higher learning curve because you got to now invest in other softwares to do that,
Yeah.
I think it's a great segue to this next segment is like we keep talking about software and we keep talking about time. And we keep talking about like calibration, and we keep talking about all these behind the scenes things that get us from what we've got in a computer, designing what we want to get out of the printer and making it all just work. And so as a dentist, I make my money, more money, chair side. Now, if I want to try to save $1, $1, I'm not looking. I just shouldn't be looking at, okay, I'm going to spend here, say, $3,000 to $5,000 on a Formlabs 3D printer for my office, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of money on Meshmaker, 3D software, and I'm going to pay for service and support to learn how to do that, and then I'm going to stay after work and learn how to do it. And then I'm going to figure it out because there's stuff's going to go wrong. And my wife and my daughter or whatever else is going on in my life has to be put aside and refined. And you said it took 9 months for you to refine this whole system.
Yeah, and let me ask you about...
Is this a push button thing, Brad? Is this like, hey, bring it in, turn it on, punch it into the computer, and it pumps it out like you do in Microsoft Word, and it comes out?
Nah,
I think there's some false security in this a little bit.
I think they sell it as that. And some of these little printers are, you just push the button, fill the resin, and they're ready. It's just what you get to them. How you get the file, how you create the file. It's the software understanding that is more of the learning curve. You said the Mesh Labs, the ExoCADs, the different softwares that you want to create different things with. That sort of learning curve comes in. The printers are actually pretty simple. Once you create a 3D artifact or a 3D dimension, you can put it to it. It does have some technique sensitivity when it comes to spruing, though. You can't just print something. It has to be supported as it gets printed. And there's a pretty big learning curve on how to learn how to sprue to support that, you know. But honestly, Wes, they're kind of push button little machines. You turn them on and go. But to make them accurate, you know, again, it depends on what level of accuracy you want. You might have to start tweaking a little bit.
So let's get into a little bit more nuts and bolts in that. So let's say that I want to start making implant surgical guides. All right, I'm ready. So let's just go through just a little kind of fun exercise here of how much.
Well, let's use your system that you're using, John, because you're doing rapid precision guided surgery, fully guided cases.
Right.
Okay. And Brad, if we were wanting to, John approached you and said, "Hey, help me get my printer set up." What would it take for him to start doing it? Go through the whole thing.
Or let's say like what am I going to spend, you know, on the printer? It's what, $3,000 to $5,000 if I'm buying most of the printers out there, right?
Yeah, I think the little one, if we're talking about the lab for a doctor's office, the one we have is roughly $6,000 all in, all told.
Okay, so $6,000 for that. Then
I'm adding this up right now.
Yeah. So assuming that I have a scanner, right, which is a small, which is just a small purchase. Let's just assume that I have a scanner already. We're not even going to factor that in. So I have a scanner. I buy a printer.
So you're using optical scanning,
right? You got to have optical
scanning. Your
scanning.
impression.
Got to have optical scanning for this to make sense to me, right? As far as ROI. So not that that's a joke, but anyway, so I buy a $6,000 printer. Okay. So now I have to have software. So I have to have ExoCAD, Mesh Mixer, these types of software. I mean, you have a feeling for what the software is going to cost? I've heard people say $10,000 or so for ExoCAD.
Yeah, you know, it depends. You know, there's companies out there that give a free planning software. You know, so you could use a free planning software from somebody. I mean, if you want to take the cheap way, you can go down that road. You know, so now you don't have any investment.
What would you do?
Well, if I was a doctor and I'm looking for ROI, I'd be looking at something free, but let's go down that pathway. So we got $6,000 and let's say we got free planning software that does free surgical guides. Okay. But you said precision guided surgery. So to do precision guided, number one, you have to have a metal guide tube processed in your surgical guide. Okay. To be precision. You can't just print a hole that has, you know, resin printing. Yeah, you know, we're talking precision guided where you're guiding the implant all the way through the surgical guide. Okay, so you would have to get the guide tube, the precision guided metal sleeve from whoever that be. You know, wherever you get that from whatever company, you'd have to get that.
Somebody makes this part.
It makes the part. So you're going to have to get that, and then you're going to have to get their STL file from that to be able to import that into your software. So in other words, when the guide prints out, it's going to print not a hole for your drill, it's going to print a hole for that guide tube. So you got to be able to figure that out and import that in there, okay? And then you got to be able to, then you'll glue that in. So there's an operation of figuring out where you get your STL, how do you import your STL, how do you create that in there, and software settings. If it's precision guided, if you're setting the depth right away, then you got to know how to set the depth within that. So pretty extensive at doing that. Free softwares, what I'm guiding you down is they don't do that. Free softwares don't do that. You know.
How long do you think it would take somebody to learn how to be really pretty good software-wise at free or not at a software program to learn how to make their own surgical guides? I mean, what does it take you to train a technician?
How many implants do you do a month? One?
Let's just say that you did.
Let's say you did 5 a month, just to talk about it. I'm just thinking about time. Yeah, how many cases do you have to plan? How many hours is it going to take you to learn how to do this?
If you do 5 a month to be proficient at it, you're probably 6 to 7 months of operating the software at 5 a month to get proficient at it, where I think your time starts to be pretty accurate or pretty quick. Otherwise, it's going to suck you dry on time because it takes a while to figure it out.
Well, how much time? Just estimate.
You guys are asking for a lot because I don't know from your aspect.
If you were going to take somebody that's never designed a guide and teach them how to do it in software,
depending on how easy the software is, it could take you an hour. It could take you half an hour. It could take you 2 hours. Depends on how easy the software is.
To teach them how to use it?
No, for sit there and teach them how to operate it and how to put it together. That's not setup. That's just trying to do the guide.
That's after you know where everything kind of is in the software. That's just actually
absolutely. That's just kind of going through because you don't do it very often.
Right.
Your first view is going to take longer.
And let's just say it's an hour a guide.
Yeah. Well,
for 6 months.
Maybe I can back up. Let me explain it in a way that I know how to explain it. I have sold software for 15 years, surgical planning software for 15 years. And there was an element about 6 years ago where we had a fairly inexpensive software. I think it was $699, $700, something like that we could sell. Fairly economical, right? And we had a ton of these we sold to doctors. Sold them because it was cheap, right? Do you know how many of those software licenses are active today?
This is it right here.
Little to none.
None.
Because
three.
they realized that they own the software, then they had to do their own plan. And they realized that it's a whole lot quicker and easier, and the lab is better at it than what they were. So almost nobody has that software anymore. They don't do it. They pay us to do the plan for them because they just don't see the value in it. Let me compare it to that. So when you talk about learning curve, Wes, I think that learning curve that we proved years ago, they didn't like the learning curve. They only did it a couple times a month. They forgot how to push the buttons. So they just realized that it's an art that they don't care to do. And if we relate it back to what you're talking about, Wes,
But even if you were really motivated to do it, even if you were like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, it's going to take you maybe 50, 100 hours worth of work before you're going to be very proficient. And then if you take it out of the potential of free software, say a night guard, for instance, now you're completely in a foreign world. Like you do not have free software to design a night guard. So now, or that I know of, maybe I'm out of my element. But now that's a whole other world where you're learning how to use software that is much more complicated. Is that right?
Let's just say,
for sure, a lot more complicated.
Let's just say you took a course, okay? You took a course. Well, that course for the weekend's going to cost you $2,500, So now you're at $8,500. Let's just try to back this in here, guys. All right? Let's just say you spend $10,000 and you get up and going and you're ready to print guides. So you got $10,000 invested in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How much does it cost for a surgical guide from a lab to be planned and sent to your office just like you would do, John?
Yeah, I mean it's a $300 or so thing.
Yeah. What is it? What is it, Brad? Coming
from
it's
your
like
lab? $350.
$350. So $10,000. Let's just say it costs you $10,000 divided by $350. Okay. You would have just to break even. Let me make sure I got this right.
It's like 25 guides or so.
25 guides just to break even.
Right.
I mean, I just don't see it.
But see that right there, Wes. See, I could see people say, "Oh, it's just 25 guides." Okay, but what you're not talking about is the time, because 25 guides. If Brad's saying, hey, after you get a good handle on the software,
30 minutes to an hour.
30 minutes to an hour, and then I think, okay, so what could I do in an hour in my practice? First of all, I can prep a crown.
To do more implants.
Right. I can prep a crown or put an implant in, or I can go home at the end of the day, which is when this usually gets done, because it usually doesn't get done during the actual day. It gets done at the end of the day. So instead of going home and hanging out with my family, I'm going to be hanging out with my printer and my computer. Now, that may appeal to you.
What if it's a cute printer?
Well, I might want to make... Yeah, that's a great point. I mean...
That's a great point.
If you fell in love with your printer, we have other issues, but I'd rather go home to my family.
Well, if you wait to the end of this episode, okay, you're going to get to see a video that's going to tell a little bit about the worst case scenario, what we actually think will happen to your printer, okay? So... We happen to believe that what really happens is, now there are a few of you that you're licking your printer, you're kissing it, you're loving on it, you love your printer.
You got rooms. You got rooms full of printers.
You got printers printing printers, and you're like loving it, and you would rather spend your evening with your printer than whoever else is in your life, and that's cool, man. Like I'm glad there are people like you out there, so you can do the R&D for me, I guess, so that I can learn from you. But I think most people, when they get into this mode, it's just like you said, Brad, they spend $700 on the software, and that's just software. That's only $700. That's still a lot of money, but that's just, they didn't invest 10 grand. But now they don't even use it anymore. You know, could this be the ultimate, you know, boat anchor product? You know, I mean, could it be? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think about that, because I think the software, if exocad costs 10 grand, and that's what I've got to have to be able to design like a denture or to be able to design a night guard, and it's taken me hundreds of hours, what's your time worth? It just gets kind of crazy. That's where paying a lab technician really is. I feel like, I hate to say this, Brad, but I think it's a bargain.
My fees just went up times 2 tomorrow.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. So what do you tell somebody, Brad? So a dentist comes to you and says, you know, I really want to get into printing. I'm really interested in it. I just am passionate about it. Because there's some people that just legitimately are passionate about this. What would you tell them? Would you say, you know, hey, buy one at your house and print some chess pieces and have a great time? You know, and just completely completely stay out of it, you know, because it's not ROI is not there, and it's really not going to be fun. Or would you say, hey, somebody comes in, they say, I really want to try printing some stuff. Like, would there be something that you would say that they should try doing to kind of see if it's for them? Should they come to the lab? Should they buy a little fun one, or should they wait a while until this is something that is really fleshed out a little bit with some new materials and things?
I would highly suggest they don't invest right now, just because, like you said, the printer's getting better and better. The materials are getting more and more. So you'll see the industry change in the next few years, but I don't think it's at that time to purchase. You know, if they're the tinker guy that, you know, it's not for me to judge. Whatever you want to do in your life, everybody's welcome to that decision. If there's somebody who wants to sit and play and print and you want to jump into it, just be prepared that, you know, materials are limited, and there's going to be a learning curve on the machine. There's going to be a learning curve on getting the files in to actually get what you want out of it. It's going to take a little bit of time. And if you want to geek out on that, and maybe you're not, you know, don't have a family to go home to, and you got extra time you want to spend that with your printer, go for it. But I don't think mainstream I'd invest right now.
So let's end the show like this, though. You know, Brad, you're obviously invested in printing technology. I mean, in a big way. And you just told us about some exciting printers before we got on the show tonight that you've reinvested in, and then one that's just blowing your mind. But why are you really investing in new printer technology? What about it is just like you in your laboratory, it excites you?
I do believe in the digital era. You know, the scanners on both sides are getting better. So the lab scanners, where we can scan impressions and not pour the model, have gotten better. The intraoral scanners for you guys, for the doctors, have gotten better. So between the combination of those two technologies, you know, we've reinvested just recently and expanded our printer capacity. That gets me excited about it. And what does get me excited is about the dentures. I think additive manufacturing in the denture world fits extremely, extremely well. Because, you know, you don't have to have that super precision like you do with crowns. So I think once denture base hits and we have a multitude of different resins and resin colors, I think we're going to be printing denture base. I think we're going to be either milling or printing the teeth that go in them. That's what I get really excited about. You know, surgical guides, we've been doing that for 15 years. You know, that is proven, and we do it on a daily basis. But it's the new materials that are coming, I think, really get exciting for us.
I try to imagine a world where in dental school, instead of waxing teeth, you know, for denture setups, that we'll be, you know, playing on software, you know, and doing some of that work there on a printer. That's exciting, you know. And as much as we may sound like you guys just have to trust me that, like, we're as futurist as it comes. Like, especially Wes, man. Like, Wes is all about, this is the thing. Like, I have to give Wes a lot of credit because he's pushed me a lot in terms of, you know, realizing that, hey, man, just step out there in some of this and work for it. Because I definitely am a lot more conservative about it than he is, and he's embracing it in a very healthy way. And I think there is a healthy embrace to this, and we're all about. I mean, I just mentioned, we were at a digital dentistry conference just in the last couple of years, seeing some amazing stuff that's coming down the line. I mean, we talked about, veneers that have inkjet printing for
Glaze.
color, for glaze,
Yeah.
that could change the way we think about, custom staining, I mean, things like that. So this stuff is super exciting, but, we always have to come back to, is it practical for the dentist, or is it just interesting? And I think that that's what all technology, we live in an era where it's very easy to show the cool stuff, but it's much, much harder than it looks a lot of times to actually implement this. What we need, though, Brad, is we need more young, excited folks in the dental lab industry.
Yeah, let's call it out. Let's call it out right now,
this.
Brad. Who do you want working for you? I mean, because we talk about this. Who do you want?
Oh, man. Who do I want? The ideal employee is futuristic thinkers that can think for themselves, problem solvers, people who think about accuracy, doing the right thing, working hard. How do you say it? There's a lack of that in the world that we're living in right now. People who have a drive and a motivation to help the dental technology careers move forward and get us into this next century.
But you have somebody walk into your lab and they've got this is a 19-year-old kid walks in your lab who's been playing with 3D printers in his bedroom for 3 or 4 years, and if he just has a decent work ethic, he's probably going to have a good chance of getting a pretty decent job, right?
Absolutely. The CAD CAM 3D printing is taking over the whole dental technology world. It used to be artists that would sit and stack glass, and now it's people who sit behind computers and can merge files together and take this file and add that file and create a three-dimensional product. Of course, you have to understand teeth in that process, and that's what we're there for, is to help train on what the teeth look like. But yeah, the world is changing, guys, for sure.
Well, I think that it's definitely, again, what we set out to do with these 2 episodes we've recorded here, the scanning episode and printing episode, is to try to present a balanced approach. We want to be not early adopters, but not too early. We want to be not too late to the party. We want to be right where we need to be. And I think as a lab, the labs are being challenged to go further out on that limb. As dentists, we need to be able to support our laboratory, but also to realize what our limitations are and let people do what they do best. If you don't feel like you can do as good of a job as what your laboratory can do, you might want to think twice about getting involved in the technology, or at least respect the amount of time it's going to take to do it well and the amount of money that it's going to take to do it really, really well, or else leave it to the professionals, And if you've enjoyed this episode, if you like some of the things we're talking about, if you're interested, if you completely disagree with us, that's one of the things we like the most, is if you completely disagree with us and you think, actually, this stuff is super easy and I have a course I'd like to tell you all about, send us some messages. We love to be challenged on this, There are definitely, Wes and I, we've talked about a lot ourselves, that there are some of these courses we need to go to see what some of these people are that are really pushing the limits are doing. There are some of the folks out there that we do think are doing a good job of trying to do it right and trying to push the limits from a dentist standpoint in the right way, and we give credit to that. But if you've enjoyed what you're hearing, and you want to hear more about digital technology, let us know. Give us your feedback. Hit us up on Facebook. Hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you thought about the show. Thanks again to Brad for being on the show with us today. We really appreciate. Yeah, we really appreciate you being with us, Brad. And one thing I want to also, again, if you're listening to this on just audio, you're not going to hear this last part of the show, because we're going to play a little clip from a movie called Office Space that, if you haven't seen, and let me give a context to this, because if you haven't watched the whole movie, you just need to know that throughout the whole movie there is a printer and our fax machine in this office that always malfunctions every single time. The printer always screws up every single time they use it. In the entire movie, it's a running gag. So at the end of the movie, pretty much at the whole end of it, they take it out back and they teach it a little lesson. So if you've never seen it, just tune in to the end of the episode and check out the video on Office Space. It's always fun hanging out with you guys. We're glad you joined us today. For Wes, for Brad, I'm John, and we are the Dental Guys.
Then I'll be spineless, I'm going insane. I think my mind just goes out of control and touch on subjects motherfuckers read about. I touch on the shit that they be leaving out. I seen this motherfuckers not smoking. I seen the same. I bet you motherfuckers will too. Because it's time, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool. Time, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool. Die, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool. Time, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool. Die, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool. Time, motherfucker, die, motherfucker, still fool.
I think it's something in the water, man. It's got to be in the water.